What does it mean to be a queen? Is it the crown, the palace, the power? Or is it something else? What if you are 17, a princess from a tiny, forgotten German duchy, and you are suddenly told you will marry the most powerful king in the world? A king you have never met, a king whose language you do not speak. What if you arrive in your new country, seasick and scared, only to be married within 6 hours? What if your new husband, the king, slowly loses his mind, and you are left to hold a family, a court, and a country together? This was the life of Queen Charlotte. It was a life of quiet strength, a life lived behind the throne, but a life that shaped a nation. Number 17, how did a 17-year-old face a king in a country alone? And Charlotte had never seen the sea before her journey to England. She was married to King George III within 6 hours of setting foot on English soil. She spoke no English upon her arrival. The formal proposal of marriage was delivered to her brother on August 8th, 1761, and she set sail for her new life just 9 days later. Her story starts not with a grand romance, but with a political calculation. George III was 22 years old. He needed a wife, he needed a Protestant wife, he needed an heir. His advisors scoured the minor courts of Germany for a suitable candidate. They wanted someone with royal blood, but not from a house powerful enough to meddle in British politics. They wanted someone educated, but not opinionated. They wanted someone, in short, who would not cause trouble. They found Sophia Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Her home was a small, unremarkable duchy in northern Germany. She was one of 10 children. Her life was quiet, educated, and provincial. She had received a good education in languages, music, and botany, but she had no experience with the backstabbing politics of a major European court. She was seen as the perfect choice, pliable, unassuming, safe. They were wrong about that. The marriage contract was signed, and Charlotte had to prepare to leave everything she had ever known. She packed her things and said goodbye to her family. The journey to England was a brutal introduction to her new life. The royal yacht was luxurious, but the North Sea in late summer was not. Her convoy was hit by 3 separate violent storms. The crossing, which should have taken 3 days, stretched into 10. For most of that time, Charlotte was violently seasick. She stayed in her cabin trying to play the harpsichord to distract herself from the nausea and the fear. Her ladies-in-waiting were too ill to even stand, yet she maintained her composure. This was her first test, and she would not fail. When she finally landed at Harwich on September 7th, 1761, she was exhausted and pale. She was then bundled into a carriage for the final leg of the journey to London. She arrived at St. James's Palace the next day. The entire court was assembled, waiting to inspect the new queen. They saw a small, plain young woman in a crumpled dress. Her mother-in-law, the formidable Princess Augusta, was said to be visibly disappointed. Charlotte, aware of the critical eyes on her, reportedly told the king that she knew she was not beautiful. George, to his credit, was kind. He took her hand and led her inside. But there was no time to rest, no time to acclimate. The wedding was scheduled for that same evening. 6 hours after arriving in a foreign land, Charlotte was dressed in a heavy, diamond-encrusted wedding gown and led to the chapel royal. She walked down the aisle to marry a man she had just met, in a ceremony conducted in a language she could not understand. She was now the Queen of Great Britain. The first few months were incredibly isolating. She was surrounded by English ladies in waiting chosen by the king and his mother. They were her companions, but they were also her guards. Her own German attendants had been sent home. She was learning a new language, new customs, and a new, much more public way of life. The court was a nest of vipers, with factions and gossip swirling around her. She had to navigate it all with no allies and no experience, yet she did not crumble. She learned English quickly, though she always spoke it with a heavy German accent. She devoted herself to her husband. She understood her primary duty was to provide an heir. She fulfilled that duty less than a year later, giving birth to the future George IV on August 12th, 1762. And she just kept going. She would go on to have 15 children in total. Her arrival was not a fairy tale. It was a baptism by fire. She was thrown into the deep end of royal life and expected to swim, and she did. She didn't just swim. She learned to navigate the currents. That initial journey, that wedding day, that lonely beginning, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the first proof of an iron will that would define her entire life. It was the moment a quiet German princess began to transform into a force of nature. Number 16, could one woman redefine a nation's green space? Kew Gardens is now a world-renowned center for botanical research. Before Charlotte, it was just a royal pleasure garden. The land was originally two separate royal estates that were combined by her husband's family. When George III gave her Richmond Lodge as a wedding present, the gardens came with it. Over the next 50 years, Charlotte, alongside George, transformed it from a private royal retreat into a botanical powerhouse. She was directly responsible for expanding the collection from a few hundred species to over 11,000. Charlotte wasn't just a casual gardener, she was a passionate and knowledgeable botanist. This wasn't a hobby, it was a scientific pursuit. She had grown up with a love for botany, and now, as queen, she had the resources to indulge that passion on an unprecedented scale. She worked closely with the leading botanists of the day, including Sir Joseph Banks and William Ayton. Banks was the director of Kew, a man who had sailed around the world with Captain Cook. Ayton was the head gardener. Together, this trio made Kew the center of the botanical world. Charlotte sponsored plant hunting expeditions to every corner of the known globe. She funded voyages to South Africa, Australia, the Americas, and Asia. These were not pleasure trips. They were dangerous scientific missions. The collectors she sent faced disease, shipwrecks, and hostile encounters. Their goal was to bring back new and exotic plants for the collections at Kew. Every ship that returned to England carrying new specimens was a victory for the Queen. She was particularly fascinated by plants from the southern hemisphere. One of her most prized acquisitions was the Strelitzia reginae, a vibrant flower from South Africa with pointed blue and orange petals. Sir Joseph Banks named it in her honor, combining her family name, Mecklenburg Strelitz, with its regal appearance. It's known today as the bird of paradise flower, and its scientific name is a direct link to the queen who first cultivated it in England. But her work wasn't just about collecting pretty flowers. It was about science. Kew became a place of serious academic study. The plants were cataloged, studied, and propagated. A detailed catalog of the plants at Kew, the Hortus Kewensis, was published in 1789, a massive undertaking that documented the garden's incredible diversity. Charlotte's library was filled with botanical books and drawings. She commissioned some of the era's finest botanical artists like Franz Bauer to create scientifically accurate illustrations of the plants in her collection. These drawings were not just art, they were crucial scientific records. She also made Kew a family affair. She and George III often took their children to the gardens. They built a small cottage on the grounds, now known as Queen Charlotte's Cottage, as a rustic retreat where the family could have picnics and enjoy a simpler life away from the formality of the court. Inside, the walls are painted with garlands of flowers, a testament to her passion. She even established a menagerie at Kew, which included the first kangaroos to ever arrive in England, brought back from one of Captain Cook's voyages. Her influence turned a private garden into a national institution. She laid the groundwork for what Kew would become a global hub for conservation and botanical science. It was her vision, her funding, and her genuine intellectual curiosity that drove this transformation. She wasn't just planting seeds in the ground, she was planting the seeds of an institution that would far outlive her. Her legacy is written in the leaves of thousands of plants that grow at Kew today, plants that would never have reached England without her. Number 15. Did a queen really introduce the Christmas tree to Britain? The Christmas tree is now a standard part of the holiday season in Britain and beyond. But it wasn't always. The tradition of bringing an evergreen tree indoors and decorating it is a German one. Queen Charlotte, a German princess, brought this custom with her to the English court. While she may not have been the absolute first person to have a Christmas tree in England, she was the one who made it a high society, fashionable event, paving the way for its later widespread popularity. Her first English Christmas in 1761 was likely a lonely one. She was in a new country, still learning the language, surrounded by strangers. It's natural that she would want to cling to the familiar traditions of her childhood. In Mecklenburg-Strelitz, it was common for families to decorate a single yew branch. Charlotte took it a step further. For years, she celebrated Christmas with a tree at Windsor for her family and the court. But it was in December 1800 that the tradition truly captured the public's imagination. That year, Charlotte hosted a large Christmas party for the children of the principal families in Windsor. A contemporary account from one of the guests, Dr. John Watkins, described the scene in detail. He wrote about a large yew tree placed in the center of the room, its branches decorated with lit wax candles, sweets, almonds, raisins, and small toys. Each child received a portion of the sweets and a toy from the tree. This was a magical sight for the English guests. It was completely novel. Watkins's description was widely published, and people were fascinated by this charming German custom. It was the Queen who made it a spectacle. By hosting this party and sharing her tradition, she gave it a royal stamp of approval. It became something to be emulated. Before Charlotte, Christmas in England was a more subdued affair, focused on church services, feasting, and some merrymaking. The idea of a decorated tree as the centerpiece of the celebration was unheard of. She introduced a new visual focus for the holiday, one that was centered on family, children, and gift-giving. The tradition remained largely within aristocratic circles for several decades. It didn't become a mass phenomenon overnight. The real explosion in popularity came a generation later, with Queen Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert. In 1848, the Illustrated London News published a drawing of Victoria Albert and their children gathered around a decorated Christmas tree. That image was the tipping point. It was widely circulated, and soon every family in Britain wanted a tree just like the Queen's. But it's important to remember where Victoria got the idea. She was continuing a tradition started by her grandmother, Queen Charlotte. And Charlotte laid the foundation. She planted the seed of the idea in the British consciousness. She turned a simple folk custom into a royal celebration. Without her party in 1800, without her dedication to her German heritage, the British Christmas might look very different today. She didn't just bring a tree into the palace. She brought a new spirit to the holiday. Number 14, how did a queen become a musical kingmaker? An 8-year-old boy arrived in London in 1764. He was a musical prodigy, touring Europe with his father and sister. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. During his time in England, he sought a royal audience. He got one with King George III and Queen Charlotte. This was not just a courtesy. For the young Mozart, a performance for the Queen was a career-making opportunity. And for Charlotte, it was a chance to engage with the art form she loved most. The meeting was a resounding success. And Charlotte was a talented musician herself. She sang and played the harpsichord. She was not a passive listener. She was an educated and discerning patron. She recognized the boy's genius immediately. During their performance at court, she tested him. She put difficult pieces by Handel and Bach in front of him, and he played them perfectly on sight. She even sang an aria while he improvised an accompaniment on the harpsichord. He passed every test she threw at him. She was so impressed that she and the king became his most important patrons during his 15-month stay in England. Mozart and his family were invited back to the palace several times. This royal endorsement was invaluable. It opened doors and cemented his reputation as a once-in-a-generation talent. The connection between them became personal. When Mozart's father, Leopold, fell ill, the family had to move out of central London to the healthier air of Chelsea. During this time, the young Wolfgang composed his first symphonies. When he was well enough to return to court, he dedicated a set of 6 sonatas, his Opus 3, to Queen Charlotte. The dedication, written in French, praises her love and understanding of music. This was not empty flattery. It was a genuine acknowledgement of her as a connoisseur. She paid him 50 guineas for the dedication, a very generous sum at the time. But Mozart wasn't the only musician she championed. She was also a crucial supporter of Johann Christian Bach, one of the sons of the great Johann Sebastian Bach. J.C. Bach had moved to London and was known as the English Bach. Charlotte appointed him as her official music master. He gave her lessons, organized her private concerts, and was a constant presence at court. His modern, elegant style of music was a favorite of the Queen's, and his influence can be heard in the early works of Mozart, who he had befriended in London. Charlotte's court was a hub of musical activity. She organized and funded a private orchestra and held regular concerts at Buckingham House and Windsor Castle. These were not stuffy, formal affairs. They were intimate gatherings where she could enjoy the music she loved with her family and close friends. She curated the programs herself, choosing the music and the performers. To receive an invitation to one of Queen Charlotte's concerts was a sign that you had truly arrived in London society. Her patronage had a lasting impact on the musical life of Britain. She used her position not just to enjoy music, but to actively cultivate and support it. She had the taste to recognize genius and the power to promote it. Her support for Mozart at a critical stage in his development is a perfect example. She wasn't just a queen who liked music. She was an active participant, a knowledgeable critic, and a powerful patron. She helped shape the soundtrack of her era. Number 13 was the London debutante ball, her invention. The image of a young woman in a white dress and feathers being presented at court is a famous one. This tradition, the debutante ball, was a cornerstone of the British social season for nearly 200 years. And it was Queen Charlotte who formalized it, creating the institution that would come to be known as Queen Charlotte's Ball. When she arrived in England, the practice of presenting young aristocratic women at court already existed, but it was haphazard. There was no set time, no specific dress code, no formal structure. It was Charlotte who saw the need for order and occasion. In 1780, to celebrate her husband's birthday, she organized a special ball. For this event, she invited a select group of young, unmarried women from noble families to be formally presented to her. This was the first Queen Charlotte's Ball. It was an instant success. It provided a clear, official entry point for young women into high society. It was the moment a girl, having completed her education, was declared eligible for marriage. The ball became the most exclusive and important event of the London season, the annual period when the elite gathered in the city for social and political events. Charlotte set the rules. The girls had to be sponsored by a woman who had already been presented at court. Their family lineage was scrutinized. There was a strict dress code. For decades, the debutantes had to wear a court dress with a hoop skirt and an elaborate headdress with ostrich feathers. The presentation itself was a highly ritualized affair. The debutante would approach the queen, perform a deep curtsy, and the queen would give a nod of acknowledgement. It was a terrifying and exhilarating moment for these young women. The ball was about more than just finding a husband, although that was certainly a primary goal. It was about solidifying the social order. It was a way of publicly identifying who belonged to the ruling class. To be presented at Queen Charlotte's Ball was to be certified as part of the elite. It opened doors not just to marriage, but to all the exclusive balls, parties, and gatherings of the season. Over the years, the event evolved. It continued long after Charlotte's death, right up until 1958, when Queen Elizabeth II abolished the practice, deeming it too elitist for the modern age. But for 178 years, it was a central part of British aristocratic life. Charlotte's creation of the ball shows her understanding of social power. She wasn't just throwing a party, she was creating a system. She took a chaotic custom and turned it into a powerful social institution that she controlled. She decided who was in and who was out. By establishing this formal ritual, she cemented her own position as the ultimate arbiter of society. It was a clever and effective way to wield influence. She may not have had direct political power, but as the gatekeeper of the social world, she was a force to be reckoned with. And number 12, why did a queen found a hospital for mothers? In 18th century London, childbirth was dangerous, especially for the poor. Many women gave birth in squalid, unsanitary conditions, often without any medical help. The mortality rate for both mothers and infants was terrifyingly high. Queen Charlotte was a mother 15 times over. She understood the risks of childbirth even with the best care available, and she decided to do something about it. In 1789, she gave her royal patronage to a small, struggling hospital in Bayswater. It was called the General Lying-in Hospital. A lying-in hospital was the term for a maternity hospital. With her support, it was renamed Queen Charlotte's Lying-in Hospital. This was more than just lending her name. She became its protector and its most important fundraiser. Her involvement was transformative. Royal patronage was the ultimate seal of approval. It attracted donations from the wealthy and gave the hospital a level of prestige it could never have achieved on its own. Charlotte took a personal interest in its operation. She visited the hospital, reviewed its work, and promoted its cause tirelessly. The hospital was founded on a simple but radical idea to provide a safe, clean place for poor, unmarried women to give birth. In an era when unmarried mothers were shunned and often left destitute, this was a profoundly compassionate mission. The hospital provided not just medical care, but also shelter and a chance for these women to recover. Charlotte's support for the hospital was a public declaration of her values. It showed a deep concern for the welfare of women and children, regardless of their social standing. This was not a glamorous cause. It dealt with the messy, often tragic realities of life for the urban poor. But Charlotte did not shy away from it. Her work had a lasting impact. The hospital she sponsored grew and thrived. It moved to a new location in Marylebone and became a leading center for obstetrics. It later merged with another hospital to become Queen Charlotte's and Chelsea Hospital. Today, it is one of the oldest and most respected maternity hospitals in the UK, a pioneer in women's and children's health. It all started with the patronage of a queen who saw a need and used her power to meet it. This wasn't her only charitable endeavor. She also founded orphanages. She was deeply involved in promoting education for women. She used her position to support causes that were often overlooked. While her husband, the king, was busy with affairs of state, Charlotte was engaged in a quieter but equally important form of nation building. She was strengthening the social fabric from the bottom up. Her founding of the maternity hospital is a powerful example of her character. She was not a remote, ceremonial figure. She was a practical, compassionate woman who saw a problem and took action. She understood that her role as queen came with a responsibility to care for her subjects, especially the most vulnerable. She was a force for good, using her influence to save lives and offer hope where there was none. Number 11. How did she endure a husband's decades-long decline? Her King George III's illness is one of the most famous and tragic stories in royal history. What is often overlooked is the immense burden it placed on his wife, Queen Charlotte. For over 3 decades, she lived with the uncertainty, the fear, and the heartbreak of her husband's recurring and ultimately permanent mental and physical decline. Her endurance in the face of this prolonged crisis was perhaps her greatest display of strength. The first major episode occurred in 1788. The king's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would talk for hours without stopping, his voice growing hoarse. He would write rambling letters, some of them over 100 pages long. He had convulsions. At times, he became aggressive. The doctors of the day had no idea what was wrong with him. Their treatments were often brutal and ineffective. They used restraining chairs, blistering agents, and emetics, all of which only worsened his suffering. For Charlotte, this was a terrifying ordeal. The man she loved and had built a life with was disappearing before her eyes. She was forced to make impossible decisions. She had to protect him from the public, from opportunistic politicians, and from himself. She had to maintain the dignity of the monarchy while her husband was in no condition to rule. The political implications were enormous. This was the Regency crisis. Her eldest son, the Prince of Wales, the future George IV, and his political allies saw an opportunity to seize power. They wanted the prince to be declared regent with full royal powers. Charlotte, along with Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, fought to limit the regent's powers. She was not just being a loyal wife, she was being a savvy political operator. She knew that if the king recovered, as she desperately hoped he would, his authority must remain intact. She was caught in an impossible position. She had to control access to the king. This put her in direct conflict with her own son, the Prince of Wales, who she deeply distrusted. The prince accused her of exaggerating the king's chances of recovery to hold on to power herself. The press and the public took sides. Charlotte was vilified by some as a power-hungry queen. In reality, she was a wife trying to protect her sick husband. The king did recover in 1789, and the nation celebrated. But the illness was not gone for good. It returned periodically, each time taking a greater toll. By 1810, it was clear that this time he would not recover. He was now also blind from cataracts and increasingly deaf. The regency was finally established in 1811, with the Prince of Wales taking over his father's duties. By law, Queen Charlotte was appointed as her husband's legal guardian. For the last decade of her life, she was his keeper. He was confined to his apartments at Windsor Castle, living in a world of confusion and shadows. She managed his care, oversaw his household, and protected his privacy. It was a profoundly sad and lonely task. She could no longer live with him, as his condition made it unsafe. She visited him regularly, but these meetings were often painful. He did not always recognize her. She bore this private tragedy with immense public dignity. She continued to perform her ceremonial duties. She maintained her court. To the outside world, she was the stoic, unshakable queen. But in her letters, you can see the strain. She wrote of her deepest affliction and her unremitting anxiety. She endured this for years, a constant grinding sorrow. Her strength was not in a single heroic act, but in the quiet daily courage of carrying on. Number 10. Could a queen be a scientist in her own right? Queen Charlotte lived in the Age of Enlightenment, a time of great scientific discovery. And she was not just a bystander. She was an active and engaged participant, particularly in the field of botany. Her interests went far beyond simple gardening. She approached it with the intellectual rigor of a scientist. Her education in Germany had included botany, and she maintained a lifelong passion for the subject. When she came to England, she found herself in a country at the center of global exploration. She used her position as queen to become a major patron of the sciences. As we've seen, her work at Kew Gardens was central to this. She transformed it into a living laboratory. But her involvement was personal, not just financial. She maintained her own private botanical library, which was one of the finest in the country. It was filled with scientific texts, catalogs of plants, and beautifully illustrated books called Florilegia. She could read scientific works in both German and French, and she kept up with the latest discoveries. She also had her own herbarium, a collection of dried and pressed plant specimens. This was a common practice for serious botanists. It allowed for the close study of plant structures. She would spend hours examining these specimens, comparing them, and learning their classifications. She surrounded herself with the leading scientific minds of the day. People like the botanist Sir Joseph Banks and the naturalist Daniel Solander were regular visitors to her court. She would have long, detailed conversations with them about their work. She wasn't just making polite, small talk. She was engaging in substantive scientific discussion. She understood the Linnaean system of classification and could talk about plant families and genera with authority. Charlotte also had a particular interest in the practical applications of botany, especially in medicine. She was knowledgeable about the medicinal properties of various herbs and plants. This was part of a long tradition of women's involvement in healing, but Charlotte brought a new scientific approach to it. Her intellectual curiosity wasn't limited to botany. She was interested in all the sciences. She and King George III shared a passion for astronomy. They built an observatory at Richmond, and they followed the work of the astronomer William Herschel, who discovered the planet Uranus in 1781. The king and queen invited Herschel to court and became his patrons. For a woman of her time, and especially a royal woman, this level of intellectual engagement was unusual. Royal women were expected to be patrons of the arts, to manage the court, and to produce heirs. They were not expected to be scientists. But Charlotte refused to be confined by those expectations. She carved out a space for herself in the intellectual world. She used her resources to advance scientific knowledge, and she pursued her own studies with passion and dedication. She proved that a queen could also be a woman of science. Number 9. What happens when a mother has to fight her own son for the crown? The Regency crisis of 1788 was not just a political battle, it was a bitter family feud. At its center were Queen Charlotte and her eldest son, George, the Prince of Wales. The prize was control of the country. When King George III first descended into his severe mental illness, a power vacuum opened up. The Prince of Wales was eager to fill it. The prince was 26 years old. He was extravagant, deeply in debt, and politically ambitious. He was a close friend of the opposition party, the Whigs, led by Charles James Fox. If the prince became regent with full powers, he would undoubtedly dismiss the current prime minister, William Pitt the Younger, and install his own friends in government. This would have been a massive political upheaval. Queen Charlotte found herself in an impossible position. Her husband was incapacitated. Her son was maneuvering to take his place. She had to choose a side. She chose her husband. She allied herself with Pitt and the government. Her goal was twofold: to protect her husband's dignity and to preserve his authority in case he recovered. This put her on a direct collision course with her son. The relationship between Charlotte and the Prince of Wales had always been strained. She disapproved of his decadent lifestyle, his gambling, his mistresses, and his political associations. He, in turn, resented her strict, moralizing influence. Now, their personal dislike erupted into a public political war. The Prince of Wales and his brother, the Duke of York, demanded to see their father. Charlotte, on the advice of the doctors, restricted access. She was trying to keep the king calm and shield him from political pressure. Her sons saw it as a power play. They accused her of hiding the true extent of the king's illness to prevent the regency. They spread rumors that she was controlling the doctors and manipulating the situation for her own benefit. The battle played out in the halls of Parliament and in the pages of the newspapers. The Prince of Wales's faction argued for an immediate and unrestricted regency. Pitt and the Queen's faction argued for a limited regency, with restrictions on the prince's power to create peers or grant offices. It was a constitutional crisis. Charlotte's role was crucial, though it was largely behind the scenes. She held firm. She met with politicians. She controlled the flow of information from the king's sick room. She refused to be intimidated by her son's bullying tactics. She was calm, resolute, and politically shrewd. She knew that giving the Prince of Wales full power would be a disaster for the country and a betrayal of her husband. In one famous confrontation, the Prince of Wales and the Duke of York forced their way into the king's room. The encounter agitated the king terribly and set back his recovery. Charlotte was furious. It confirmed all her fears about her son's recklessness. Ultimately, Charlotte and Pitt's strategy worked. They delayed the passage of the Regency Bill long enough for the king to begin his recovery in February 1789. When he was well enough to resume his duties, the crisis was over. The Prince of Wales was thwarted. It was a victory for Charlotte, but it came at a great personal cost. Her relationship with her eldest son was permanently damaged. But she had done what she felt she had to do. She had faced down her own child to protect her husband and the stability of the nation. It was a brutal, ugly fight, but it showed her political courage and her unwavering sense of duty. Number 8, how did she manage the demands of 15 children? Being a queen is a full-time job. Being a mother to 15 children is also a full-time job. Queen Charlotte had to do both. Between 1762 and 1783, over a span of 21 years, she gave birth to 9 sons and 6 daughters. 13 of them survived to adulthood. This was an unusually large family, even for the time, and managing it was a monumental task. Charlotte and George III were determined to be different from previous royal parents. They wanted to be personally involved in their children's lives. This was a departure from the royal norm, where children were often raised in separate households by governesses and tutors, with little contact with their parents. The king and queen created a relatively informal and loving family life, at least in the children's early years. They played with them, read to them, and supervised their education. But it was still a royal upbringing, and that meant it was incredibly structured and demanding. Charlotte ran the royal nursery with military precision. The children's days were strictly scheduled with set times for lessons, meals, prayers, and play. She believed in a rigorous education for both her sons and her daughters, which was progressive for the time. The princesses were taught languages, history, geography, music, and art. Charlotte was a demanding mother. She had high expectations for her children's behavior and their moral development. As they grew older, this created friction, especially with her sons. The Prince of Wales, as we've seen, rebelled spectacularly against his strict upbringing. Many of his younger brothers followed his example, running up debts, having affairs, and causing public scandals. The press gleefully reported on the misadventures of the royal dukes, which was a constant source of stress and disappointment for their mother. Her relationship with her daughters was equally complex. She loved them dearly, but she was also incredibly controlling. She was reluctant to see them marry. Some historians believe she wanted to keep them at home as her companions, especially as the king's health declined. Others suggest that there was a shortage of suitable Protestant princes for them to marry. Whatever the reason, the result was that the princesses lived a sheltered, claustrophobic life at court well into their 30s and 40s. They called their home the nunnery. Only 3 of the 6 daughters ever married, and they did so late in life. This has led to a view of Charlotte as a cold and possessive mother. But it's more complicated than that. Her letters show a deep affection for all her children. She worried about them constantly. Her strictness came from a desire to protect them from the corrupting influences of the court and to ensure they lived up to their royal responsibilities. The sheer logistics of managing such a large family were staggering. There were dozens of tutors, governesses, and servants to oversee. There were illnesses to nurse, educations to plan, and marriages to negotiate, and she had to do all this while fulfilling her public duties as queen and supporting her husband through his escalating illness. Her life as a mother was a mixture of great joy and profound sorrow. She created a close-knit family, but she also struggled to let her children go. She was the matriarch of a dynasty, a role she took with the utmost seriousness. It was a constant, exhausting, and often thankless job, but she never shirked it. Number 7, could a queen maintain her own separate court? Every monarch has a court, but Queen Charlotte had 2. She had the formal court she shared with the king at St. James's Palace. But she also had her own, more intimate and influential court, which she established at Buckingham House. In 1762, King George III bought Buckingham House for his new bride. It was intended as a private family residence, a retreat from the stuffy formality of St. James's. The public called it the Queen's House, and it truly was her domain. It was here that she raised her children. It was here that she housed her library and pursued her scientific interests. And it was here that she presided over her own social world. An invitation to the Queen's House was highly coveted. It was a more exclusive and relaxed affair than the large formal events at the official court. It was at Buckingham House that she held her private concerts featuring musicians like J.C. Bach and Mozart. It was here that she hosted small receptions and card parties. To be part of this inner circle was to have the Queen's personal favor. This separate court gave Charlotte her own sphere of influence. While the king's court was focused on politics and statecraft, the queen's court was the center of culture, fashion, and high society. She was the undisputed tastemaker. The clothes she wore, the music she listened to, the artists she patronized, all of it set the standard for the elite. She used this power deliberately. She carefully curated her guest list. She used her social events to reward her friends and allies and to exclude those who had displeased her. After the Regency crisis of 1788, for example, the supporters of the Prince of Wales found themselves suddenly uninvited to the Queen's house. It was a subtle but powerful way of signaling her displeasure and enforcing loyalty. Her court was also a distinctly female space. While men were, of course, present, the tone was set by the Queen and her ladies-in-waiting. It was a place where women's interests in music, art, literature, and conversation were paramount. The establishment of this separate court was a shrewd move. It allowed her to build her own power base, independent of her husband. It gave her an arena where her intelligence, taste, and social skills could shine. In an era when women, even queens, had little direct political power, Charlotte created her own form of power through social and cultural influence. Buckingham House was the physical embodiment of that power. It wasn't just a home, it was her headquarters. The palace, we know today as Buckingham Palace, began its life as Queen Charlotte's personal fortress of influence. Number 6, was her anti-slavery stance real? The late 18th century was the height of the abolitionist movement in Britain. It was a deeply divisive and passionate political issue. The slave trade was a huge part of the British economy, and the pro-slavery lobby was incredibly powerful. The royal family was expected to remain above the political fray. But there is compelling evidence to suggest that Queen Charlotte held strong anti-slavery views. This was not something she could declare from a balcony. Her position required subtlety, but she found ways to signal her sympathies. The most famous example is her relationship with the painter Thomas Gainsborough. Gainsborough was known to be a supporter of the abolitionist cause. He painted a portrait of Ignatius Sancho, a black writer, composer, and abolitionist who had been born into slavery. This was a radical act at the time, yet Gainsborough remained a favorite painter of the royal family. Charlotte also had a fondness for the works of the poet William Cowper, who was one of the most prominent abolitionist voices of the era. His poems, like The Negro's Complaint, were powerful pieces of anti-slavery propaganda. The Queen was known to read and admire his work. Another key piece of evidence comes from her choice of decorative objects. She was a great admirer of Josiah Wedgwood's pottery. Wedgwood was a leading abolitionist. He produced a famous medallion showing a chained slave kneeling with the inscription, "Am I not a man and a brother?" This became the emblem of the abolitionist movement. It was a hugely popular and politically charged object, and Charlotte reportedly owned and displayed Wedgwood's pottery at court, a subtle but clear sign of her leanings. There are also accounts from people who knew her. The abolitionist leader William Wilberforce, who led the campaign in Parliament, believed he had the Queen's support. He and others in the movement saw her as a quiet ally within the palace. Why did she have to be so quiet? The royal family was deeply divided on the issue. Two of her own sons, the Duke of Clarence, the future William IV, and the Duke of York, were vocally pro-slavery. They spoke out in the House of Lords in defense of the slave trade. For the Queen to have taken a public stance against them would have caused a massive family and political scandal. So she worked in quieter ways. Through her patronage, her artistic tastes, and her personal associations, she made her position known to those who were paying attention. As a form of soft power, in a deeply polarized debate, she lent her quiet prestige to the side of abolition. It may not have been a loud declaration, but in the constrained world she inhabited, it was a meaningful and courageous stance. She used her influence not to command, but to persuade, showing her support for one of the most important moral causes of her time. Number 5, how did a queen influence the look of an entire generation? Queen Charlotte was the ultimate fashion influencer of her time. In an age before magazines and social media, the Queen's court was the epicenter of style. What Charlotte wore, the rest of high society rushed to copy. She was not a flamboyant fashion plate like Marie Antoinette in France, but her style was distinctive and widely emulated. When she first arrived from Germany, her clothes were seen as simple and provincial, but she quickly adapted to the opulent style of the English court. She became known for her elaborate gowns, her high powdered hairstyles, and her magnificent collection of jewels. Diamonds were her particular favorite. On formal occasions, she would be covered in them, a dazzling display of royal wealth and power. She used fashion as a tool. It was a way to project an image of majesty and authority. The elaborate court dress, with its wide hoop skirts and stiff bodices, was not designed for comfort. It was designed to impress. It created a physical distance around the wearer and demanded a certain kind of posture and movement. It was a uniform of power, but Charlotte's influence went beyond just formal court attire. She was also an early adopter of simpler, more rustic styles for private life. At her cottage at Kew or at Windsor, she would wear more relaxed dresses made of cotton or muslin. This reflected the growing natural trend in fashion, a move away from the stiff artificiality of court life. By embracing this style, she helped to popularize it among the upper classes. She was also a major supporter of the British textile industry. At a time When fashionable fabrics were often imported from France, Charlotte made a point of wearing English-made silks and lace. This was a patriotic act, a way of supporting the national economy. She encouraged the ladies of her court to do the same. One of her most lasting contributions to fashion was her popularization of the court plume, the headdress made of 3 ostrich feathers worn by debutantes being presented at court. This became a mandatory part of the debutante uniform for over a century, a direct legacy of the style set by Queen Charlotte. She understood that a queen's appearance was a matter of public interest and political importance. Her wardrobe was carefully planned and managed. Every outfit was a statement. She used her clothes to communicate her status, her patriotism, and her taste. In doing so, she didn't just dress herself, she dressed an era. The look of Georgian England, with its powdered wigs and diamond stomach.rs, was a look that she defined. Number 4. Did she wield real political power behind the scenes? Officially as a queen consort, Charlotte had no formal political power. She could not make laws, command armies, or appoint ministers. That was the king's role. But to assume she had no influence would be a great mistake. Charlotte was a shrewd and intelligent observer of politics, and she wielded considerable power behind the scenes. Her main source of influence was her relationship with the king. George III trusted his wife implicitly. They were not just husband and wife, they were partners. He valued her opinion and often discussed affairs of state with her. While she could not make decisions for him, she could certainly shape his thinking. She had his ear in a way that no minister or courtier ever could. She was a keen judge of character. She was adept at reading people and understanding the complex web of alliances and rivalries at court. She would advise the king on appointments, warning him against those she considered untrustworthy or self-serving. Her recommendations carried great weight. A politician who earned the queen's disapproval would find his career prospects severely limited. The Regency crisis was the most obvious example of her political skill. She outmaneuvered her son and his powerful political allies. She held her ground, worked with the government, and protected her husband's interests. This was not the action of a political novice. It was the work of a seasoned operator. She was also a prolific letter writer. Her correspondence with her brother Charles of Mecklenburg-Strelitz is filled with sharp and insightful commentary on British and European politics. These letters show that she was not just informed about political events, she had strong opinions about them. She understood the intricacies of diplomacy and the personalities of the key players. Her social power, centered at the Queen's house, was also a political tool. An invitation to her inner circle was a sign of political favor. Being excluded was a clear message. She used this social leverage to enforce political loyalty and to reward those who supported the king. She was always careful not to overstep her constitutional role. She was discreet. Her influence was felt, but it was rarely seen. She operated in the private spaces of the palace, the drawing room, the dinner table, the private correspondence. But the effects of her influence were felt in the public sphere. She was a stabilizing force, a constant and loyal advisor to the king. She may not have worn the crown of a ruler, but she had the mind of one. She was a silent partner in the governance of the nation. Number 3, how did she create her own intellectual sanctuary? In a life defined by public duty and family chaos, Queen Charlotte carved out a space for her own mind. This space was her library. She was a true bibliophile, a lover and collector of books. Over her lifetime, she amassed a personal library of over 4,500 volumes. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could pursue her intellectual interests away from the pressures of the court. Her library was not just a collection of novels, it was a serious, scholarly library reflecting her wide-ranging interests. It contained major works of English, French, and German literature. It had books on history, geography, and theology. And, of course, it had one of the finest collections of botanical books in the country. She had her own bookbinder, and her books were beautifully bound in leather, stamped with her personal crest. She didn't just collect books, she read them. Many of the books from her library that survive today contain her personal book plate, and sometimes even her handwritten notes in the margins. Her library was a reflection of her identity. It was a German princess's library, with a large number of books in her native language. It was a botanist's library filled with scientific texts and illustrations. It was a queen's library with books on history and politics. And it was a woman's library with works by female authors like Fanny Burney, who she knew personally and appointed as her keeper of the robes. This love of learning was something she tried to pass on to her children. The royal schoolroom was well stocked with books. She personally supervised her daughter's reading. She believed that an educated mind was essential, even for a princess. Creating this library was an act of independence. In a world where her life was largely dictated by others, by her husband, by the state, by her maternal duties, her library was something that was entirely her own. She chose the books, she curated the collection. It was a space that she controlled, a world built of paper and ink, where she could be a scholar and an intellectual. After her death, her library was sold at auction. The sale lasted for days, a testament to the size and quality of her collection. The dispersal of her library was a great loss, but the record of it remains. It shows us a side of Queen Charlotte that is often forgotten, the quiet, studious woman who found refuge and intellectual freedom in the pages of her books. Number 2, did she keep her dignity when the world was watching her failures? Queen Charlotte's life was lived under a microscope. Every action, every decision, every family scandal was subject to public scrutiny. And there were many scandals. Her son's behavior was a constant source of public embarrassment. The Prince of Wales's secret and illegal marriage to Maria Fitzherbert, his mountains of debt, and his extravagant lifestyle were the talk of the town. His brothers were not much better. The press, particularly the savage political cartoonists of the day, like James Gilray, were merciless. They depicted the royal family in the most unflattering terms imaginable. Charlotte herself was often portrayed as a miserly, grasping, and ugly figure, nicknamed Old Snuffy because of her habit of taking snuff. And then there was the ultimate public trial of the king's illness. The madness of the king was not a private family matter. It was a national crisis. The intimate, painful details of his condition were debated in Parliament and reported in the newspapers. Charlotte's role as his guardian, her disputes with her son, her own grief and stress, it all became public property. She was accused of hiding the king away for her own purposes, of being power-hungry, of being an unfeeling wife. Through all of this, she maintained a remarkable public composure. She never responded to the gossip. She never engaged with the cartoonists. She continued to perform her duties with an almost rigid sense of propriety. Her face became a mask of stoic dignity. This was her armor. She understood that as queen, she could not show weakness. She could not afford to be seen as a victim. This stoicism came at a great personal cost. Her private letters reveal her deep distress. She wrote of her shattered nerves and the cruel attacks she endured. She was a woman in immense pain, but she bore that pain in private. To the world, she presented a front of unwavering strength. Even in the final years of her life, when she was in poor health and grieving the death of her youngest daughter, Princess Amelia, she did not falter. She continued to hold her court receptions, known as drawing rooms, even when she was too weak to stand for long periods. She would sit in her chair, a formidable and unbowed figure, receiving the bows and curtsies of the court. This was not coldness or a lack of feeling. It was a conscious choice. It was an act of supreme self-control. She believed that the dignity of the monarchy was paramount. No matter the personal cost, no matter the public humiliation, the institution had to be protected. Her ability to endure decades of public criticism and private heartbreak without cracking was perhaps her most profound display of strength. She kept her dignity intact when it would have been so easy to lose it. Number 1, what is the true legacy of a queen who lived in a king's shadow? Queen Charlotte died on November 17, 1818. She was 74 years old. She had been Queen Consort of Great Britain for 57 years, longer than any before her. She died at her country home in Surrey, sitting in a chair, holding the hand of her eldest son, the Prince Regent. Her husband, King George III, was still alive, but he was lost to his illness, unaware that his lifelong companion was gone. He would die just over a year later. For so long, her story has been told as a footnote to his. She was the plain German princess he married. She was the mother of his 15 children. She was the long-suffering wife of the Mod King. But that is not the whole story. It is not even the most important part of the story. Her legacy is not a single grand achievement. It is a mosaic of smaller, quieter, but no less significant accomplishments. It is in the gardens at Kew, which she transformed into a scientific institution. It is in the music of Mozart, the genius she recognized and supported when he was just a boy. It is in the tradition of the Christmas tree, the German custom she brought to her new home. It is in the maternity hospital that still bears her name, a testament to her compassion. Her legacy is in the social world she defined, the balls she created, the fashion she set. It is in the books she collected, the science she sponsored, and the artists she patronized. She was a cultural architect, shaping the taste and intellectual life of a nation, and her legacy is in her sheer resilience. She arrived as a frightened teenager and became the unshakable matriarch of a dynasty. She navigated a treacherous court, endured a heartbreaking family tragedy, and faced down her political enemies. She did it all with a quiet dignity and an iron will. She was a force of nature not because she was loud or revolutionary, but because she was constant. She was like a great river, quietly and persistently shaping the landscape around her. She lived in her husband's shadow, but she was not overshadowed. She created her own light, a steady glow of intelligence, strength, and duty that burned for more than half a century. To understand the Georgian era, you must understand her. She was not just the king's wife. She was Queen Charlotte.